guys, it's Abby. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reading to you 28 terrifyingly true ghost stories. If you guys like this video, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up. Click the subscribe button down below and turn on post notifications so you never miss a video. I post every Sunday and sometimes Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I would also appreciate it if you could check me out on Instagram and TikTok. I post creative special effects makeup over on those platforms, and you can also add me on Snapchat. I love to vlog my days on my story over there. Without further ado, let's get right on into the video. Our first story is by the user Death Echoes 1227. It's called "My son said a name we haven't said in 7 years and then said it was his imaginary friend." For context, my son, 6, is on the spectrum. He has never heard the story I'm about to tell or any details about this. I will get into what he said/did after I explain. So when I, 25 female, was around 3 to 4 years old, I had this imaginary friend named Peter. Petey was what I called him. We always played, and after I was about 10, my mother explained to me that my brother, 29 male, 14 at the time of her telling me, used to talk to Petey and his brother John, as well as their father Jack. According to my mother, since I cannot fully recall all memories, nor can my brother, Jack was a mean guy that told us to do very bad things, like bad things. Example, take your own life, take someone else's life, etc. My mom told my brother not to talk to him and only to talk to the good ones. Turns out John and Petey were trying to protect us from what their dad did, resulting in their death. It was later found out around 2016, we were 16 and 20 at this point, that the house we lived in our entire childhood was in fact the house a serious murder took place. The father, Jackson, his sons, Peter, 6 male, and Jonathan, 13 male, killed them both and then himself. After piecing this all together, it makes sense the kids were warning us about this being an influence and trying to protect us. Fast forward to now. My son has been having some severe behavioral issues recently, and when asked why, he said his friend Jack told him to do the bad stuff, and that his friend Petey plays with him when we are busy. We asked him, "Who is Jack and Petey?" and his entire face shifted, making a pucker, looking up so far like his eyes were rolling into his head, and covered his ears, saying very loudly, "God said I can't talk to you." We asked him who God said he couldn't talk to, and he blankly walked away as if nothing happened and didn't say a word. My son makes weird faces all the time due to stimming from his autism, but nothing like this. I'm not sure what he meant, and he won't tell us who God said not to talk to and just walked away extremely quiet and blank-faced. As weird as this sounds, I don't think it's a type of possession, but I need advice. Has anyone ever experienced something like this? That is so interesting. I think it's fascinating and obviously really sad that it seems like they were talking to people as a child that were unfortunately killed in that house. But the connection is crazy that they were able to put that together, and for some reason, I guess it seems like her son has now come in contact with them too. It's so weird that if it's in a different house and not where everything took place, I wonder why it seems like those spirits could have followed her. Unless it was just like the kids following her, wanting to protect her, and then the horrible dad decided to follow too. That's so weird. I honestly would be really terrified, like after, having those friends as a child and then learning about the history about like why you have those ghost friends and how they ended up being ghosts. And then after all that, years later, those names popping up again, that would be pretty frightening. The next story is by the user Ding Dong I Am Wrong, and it's titled, "My Dad Let Me Know He Was Still Around After Death." My dad died when I was 19. We weren't particularly close and definitely had our issues, but I still loved him and his death rocked my world. I was devastated by the loss. When I was little and he'd get home from work, I'd wander into his office and sit on his lap, and he'd take out a bag of Smarties and share a pack with me. They were his favorite candy all of my life. About 2 weeks after he died, I was really feeling the pain, and I asked my dad if he was still around and could hear me/see me, and to give me a sign. Only a few hours later, I was walking through Target with some friends and something hit me in the back. I looked down and there was a singular pack of Smarties that had been thrown. No one was around, and hell, maybe it was a fluke, but I just about broke down right then and there. It felt like he answered. I definitely think that he answered in that moment. I mean, what are the odds of that? I definitely believe that all of our loved ones are around at any given moment, going between person to person and checking in on them and watching over us. Yeah, I definitely think that when you ask for a sign, they're bound to give it in whatever way that they know you'll recognize and in whatever way they can. Definitely think that was an instance of that. So it's really nice whenever you get confirmation that your loved ones are still around you. Our next story is by the user Strawberry Status 7641, titled Happy Haunting. Saw my deceased friend on the night shift at work. I had a wonderful, kind friend who I worked with for a few years at a large hospital in San Diego. She loved her job and came into work with a big smile each night shift, often in pink scrubs and a high ponytail. She was a joy to be around and sadly diagnosed with leukemia and passed away 2 years later. About 6 months after she passed, I was walking down the hall of the hospital unit we worked on. It was probably between 1 and 4 a.m., and I would often walk the halls to get some exercise and stay awake. When my friend was alive, she would sometimes take a nap in an empty patient room on her lunch break. As I walked that night, I passed by an unoccupied patient room, and as I passed the door, I realized that woman was actually inside the room, sitting on the hospital bed wearing pink. It took me a second to register that, but knowing that there should not be a person in that room, I walked back to check out the room, and for the briefest moment, saw that it was her, sitting on the side of the hospital bed in pink scrubs, ponytail, big smile on her face as if to say, hey, just checking in on you all and hoping the night is going smooth. I called out her name and then she was gone. I immediately started to cry and rushed to the nurse's station and told my colleagues. They all thought it was her and that of course she would show up at work because she truly loved it. This was honestly reassuring to me and I thank my colleagues because we knew how much she missed work in the 2 years she was ill and unable to be there. This is a happy haunting and cemented in my mind that there is another realm we just don't understand. I think that is definitely the case. And again, I think our loved ones are always visiting us whenever they can. And that's so nice that she just popped in like that. Our next story is by the user Momentary Lapse 007. It's titled, I found my friend's ashes amongst abandoned items in his home. I had a friend some years ago, and he and I would spend a fair share of our free timing just BSing around on his kitchen table or mine. This friend of mine was overweight, but got around well considering his physical limitations. However, he passed away several years ago now at the age of 54. This was a good 14 years longer than he was expected to live in his condition, but still his death was unexpected and sudden. We talked about many things, but one thing I remember well was his desire to have his body's ashes poured in the Gulf of Mexico. After he passed, his son hired me to clean and repair his house so it could be sold. My friend often said that the home he lived in was a curse and a sort of self-imposed prison. Having bought my first home at 20, I understood exactly what he meant by this. Long story short, after me and a small crew removed all the items left behind the house, we arrived at a point where all that was left in our way was a few odds and ends that family members had an interest in, but not enough interest to pick the items up so we could paint and spackle the room. Among the last items in the house was what I had thought was a thick book, maybe a Bible. This item sat by itself on a fireplace mantle, and for some reason didn't get collected and disposed of when we did the trash out. So one evening I found myself working alone, cleaning the floors in the rooms we had finished. At some point I walked to the fireplace to inspect this book, and much to my horror I found it's not a book, but a receptacle containing the ashes of my friend. There, left in his prison, not even amongst the items to be picked up. An afterthought. Everything that remained of my friend on this earth was sitting alone on a mantle. No one cared enough to even take them out of there, or even to have the ashes placed in a nice urn. Just left gathering dust on the mantle. I believe in paranormal experiences. I have personally bore witness to unexplainable occurrences, but I have never been frightened by the thought of such things. In this house, I have spent many happy hours there with my friend and was comfortable there. But at that moment, as I stood there in disbelief at what I had found, my friend screamed at me so loud I felt it reverberate through my body. This scared the hell out of me and I ran. I ran so fast I didn't lock the house back up or turn off the lights. I just got the hell out of there. But once in my ragged, junky car, I realized what had to be done. I would have to make the 12-plus-hour trip to the Gulf Coast to give my pal's remains to the ocean, since he had told me his wish many times. I didn't think my vehicle would make the trip, and this was the middle of the pandemic and the most financially difficult time of my life, but I had to do it. The worst part was walking back in the house, which now for the first time felt cold and unwelcoming. We had ourselves an adventure, I can tell you. Me and my buddy headed to the beach for the last time together. The ride home seemed lonesome without his remains, which looking back is strange in itself. Going down felt oddly like an adventure, not knowing if my old truck was going to give up and having to pinch every dime I had. The way back felt sad, like I had been left behind in kind of a living hell, and the uncertainty that had been exciting before now filled me with dread and fear. It took several years to shake that feeling, and now it's coming back. I feel like everyone deserves to have a friend like that will do anything to make sure their final wishes come true. That is so sweet that even though there were a lot of things that could have kept him from doing that, he still went and made sure that, his ashes were spread where he wanted them to be. I can't believe that none of his family members cared enough to do that. They were concerned about taking stuff that they wanted, but not him. Our next story is by the user UsefulCow8575. It's titled, Saw a Woman Camping, Now Experiencing Things at Home. Last weekend, my wife and I took our 2 sons out camping with my oldest son's girlfriend into the woods. We were camping for the full weekend. It was a fun time, but the last night I woke up with an urge to go check our surroundings. It felt uneasy. I woke up and noticed my sons weren't in their tents. I started walking, calling their names, and they were on a trail ahead. They also said they had the urge to come out. My wife and my son's girlfriend were in the tent still. We were a little ways down the trail, and the water was probably half a mile ahead. We kept walking, just talking now that we were up. And as we got closer to the water, I heard someone talking, very faintly. My sons heard it as well. As we got closer, there was a young woman, maybe late teens, early 20s, very dirty and looking like she was crying, sitting on the ground next to the water. I told my sons to wait, and I went up to ask her if she was okay. She looked at me, whispered something in another language I couldn't understand, and it was as if I blinked and she was gone. My sons witnessed the whole thing as well. I was shaken up along with my sons, unable to explain what we witnessed. To be honest, I'm a skeptic, and I wasn't even sure what I had witnessed was paranormal, even though there was no other way to explain it. We left early the next morning, and there was no signs of anyone else out there with us. I had been having dreams of this girl since I'd seen her. 2 nights after we got back, the house felt freezing, even though the temperature was at 75. Everyone felt it. Our dog was acting really weird, jumpy, less friendly. I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't even think it could be paranormal. A few nights after we got back, my wife and I started hearing footsteps in the hallway. Assuming it was the kids, we didn't check at first. Then when they didn't stop and it sounded like it was only going up and down the hallway, I checked it out and no one was there. The footsteps didn't happen for a few more nights, then later on in the week, they happened again. Then Saturday night, my son's girlfriend woke up and was screaming because she said there was a young girl staring at my son, her boyfriend, next to his side of the bed, and then was gone within seconds. Her description matched what we had seen. I've been Googling the area we camped, and I've been finding nothing that matches what we had seen. I've been researching nonstop, and had finally come to Reddit. Any advice? I wonder if it was a young woman who passed away out there, and the fact that they took the time to go up to her and check on her and make sure she was okay almost invited her to come back, her spirit. I wonder if that's what it is. It was she felt like she was safe with them because they actually cared enough to ask her how she was doing. And so her spirit just came back home with them. To me, that's the only thing I can think of. Our next story is by the user The Moradorian, titled, I Saw My Dead Neighbor Walk in the House. So recently, I have lost 3 neighbors in the last 3 months. 2 due to cancer and 1 due to sepsis. It's been a sad time for me as I knew them growing up, and the lady that I saw lives, or lived, in a bungalow. Her husband is only there now. As I was coming down the stairs to make a cup of tea, I went to the sink to fill the kettle, and I saw a figure in a cream jumper walk into the middle of the bungalow. It was only a split second, and then it disappeared. I knew it was a lady in the bungalow who sadly passed, checking up on her bereaved husband. It was a bittersweet experience. It's a sad story, but really sweet that she's still kind of hanging out there. That's kind of a crazy thing to see, and no, it wasn't actually her. Our next story is by the user FancyCommittee3347, and it's titled, 3 is a Crowd. In a hotel in a rural part of China, my friend and I went up to our room after a late dinner. When we were in our room, the receptionist called us and said, "Sorry, only 2 persons allowed in the room. You have to pay more if it's 3 people." We told the receptionist that there are only 2 of us, but the receptionist insisted again that on the corridor camera she saw 3 people enter our room. I told her to come up and check if she doesn't believe us, and suddenly she went quiet and said she was mistaken and apologized. The next morning, my roommate told me that we should check out ASAP. The whole night he kept dreaming of a lady sitting on a chair or at his bed, staring at him. After we left the hotel, he told me he felt and heard someone behind us, following us back to the hotel, but every time he turned around, there was no one there. Crazy. I bet, obviously what she saw was, another person, but, a spirit person? Our next story is by the user EvanLTA, titled, I don't believe in the paranormal. However, I cannot explain the story my parents recently told me. My parents only just recently told me a story about something that happened when I was around 2 years old. When I was around 2 years old, I would often say, our neighbor's mother will come by soon, while playing in the living room. I would say it during random moments of the day, on random days of the week. This went on for about a year or so, and once during that year, my mother, a bit creeped out at that point, would ask me, why is she coming by? To which I would respond, she is angry. What neither me nor my parents knew that at the time was that our neighbor's mother had actually passed away not long before that. I don't actually remember this myself, but rather because of my parents who told me this story. They have certainly not forgotten what happened in that year. She was just checking out the neighborhood. I don't know, it's so crazy how kids know things and see things that we can't. It's they also they don't even know how to explain it because they're just little kids and can't comprehend it, but they know they saw and they have no idea how crazy it is. Our next story is by the user The Tiny Kaleidoscope, titled, I think I had my first paranormal encounter. I'm a 17-year-old guy and recently visited some extended family for the holidays, so my family stayed in a hotel for about a week. We all shared the same room. I went to go get some ice, and the ice machine is on the opposite end of the hallway. Midway through the hallway to the left is another hallway. So from my perspective, it forms a sideways T-shape. A little before I get to the intersection, an old man walks up. A really old man, he couldn't possibly be less than 80. He was walking slowly, slightly hunched and shaky in a way that some old people do. And he stopped when he got to the intersection, but didn't acknowledge me. He just looked around confused. I said hello, and he widened his eyes and looked at me in sudden shock, like I just woke him out of sleep or something, and I wasn't even talking that loud. I asked, are you okay? And he smiled and nodded, and then pointed to me, and opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but didn't. He just kept on smiling. It was kind of awkward, so I just said, have a nice day, and he nodded again. I kept walking forward. I turned around a few seconds later, and he was just standing there, but not looking at me, just looking lost. I continued on to the ice machine, but started to feel bad, like maybe he was someone's lost grandpa, so I turned back around, but he was gone. He wasn't in the hallway I was in, so the only place he could have went was from the direction he came, and I power walked that way, so he wasn't in that hall either. There's just no way that the old man could have moved that fast. The elevator was in the hallway he came from, but even still, the entire interaction from me deciding to go back was just too quick for him to make his way there and get on, and I can't recall hearing any doors open or close. I honestly just think the old man was some kind of ghost. There's just no way. I mean, maybe his shocked reaction was that someone could actually see him and interacted with him. I don't know, that makes me kind of sad. He's like a lonely old man ghost just wandering the halls all confused. I don't like that. Sad. Our next story is by the user Frozen Hermit, titled, My Cat Hates the Thing Downstairs. A few years back, I lived in a small house in a really sketchy neighborhood. I mention that because this house was incredibly secured. Bars over the windows and a metal bar, screen doors. The experience I'm going to share could easily be written off as an intruder looking around, but in this case, that's just not possible. I have tons of stories about this place if you guys are interested in hearing more. I believe in the paranormal, but I consider myself skeptical in the sense that I always try to find a logical explanation before assuming anything paranormal is going on. Some of the experiences I've had at this place, including the one I'm telling you, have zero logical explanation. Inside the house was me, my roommate, and my 2 cats. Roommate and I were passed out in our rooms, and around 3 in the morning I heard this absolutely inhumane sound emanating through the house. Cat number 1 was sleeping next to me, and once the noise started, all her hair stood up, and she began to whine. I looked around the house, and cat number 2 wasn't in his normal sleeping spot in the kitchen, and I noticed the basement door was wide open. I checked the locks before going downstairs, and this shriek is still happening every 3 to 5 seconds. My roommate was awake and groggy at this point as well. Once I got downstairs, I saw all the lights were turned on. There were 4 lights, all of which had light bulb chains and needed to be pulled on to turn on. I quickly found the source of the sound. Cat number 2 was shrieking at nothing in the corner. I immediately felt sick and like something was really wrong, and I needed to get back upstairs. I grabbed my cat, and he lashed out at me and clawed up my arm right until I got back into the bedroom, and then immediately he calmed down and slept until noon the next day. This cat was essentially feral, but never bit me or lashed out like he did that night. It was the only time I'd ever seen him be genuinely terrified. Despite the fact that I was cut up, I wasn't mad at him. I felt something truly evil down there, and for the rest of the time living there, neither of my cats would so much as look near that door or would whine near the steps anytime my roommate or I would go down there. That's so crazy. Animals definitely see things. They're like kids. They have like this extra sense and can see things that the rest of us probably can't. So I would not be surprised if the cat saw something or sensed something down there and was like freaking out because of it. I don't know. If your animal reacts poorly to something, just it's best to move on and ignore it. Their judgment is better than ours. Our next story is by the user Just Pizza Kate, titled Ghost Didn't Like the Decoration. This is probably such a lame story, but it still baffles my whole family to this day. I'm from Germany, where people aren't particularly inclined to believe in ghosts or the supernatural. Germans genuinely prefer logical explanations for strange events and don't really embrace things like Halloween or horror movies. So when something weird happens, the usual response is a shrug and it is what it is. That's why it's so surprising that even my family ended up saying, okay, maybe it was a ghost. I grew up in a very old house. My parents still live there, actually. It dates back to the 1910s, though the interior has been renovated several times. Despite the updates, the house still has a spooky vibe, especially at night. I remember how many of my childhood friends were too scared to go to the bathroom after dark. It became a bit of a running joke. Over the years, small, strange things would happen. Magnets would fall off the fridge for no reason. Pictures would tumble from the walls. But we just brushed it off, muttering, it is what it is. Then one night, something happened that we just couldn't explain. My mom had this steel sign in the kitchen. It was one of those funny ones that said, you take 1 glass of wine and pour it into the cook. She kept it at the far end of the kitchen counter, where she was completely secure. No way it would have fallen on its own. One night, about 10 years ago, we all heard a loud metallic clatter. The next morning, we noticed that the sign was missing. It wasn't on the counter. It wasn't on the floor. It hadn't fallen behind the counter either. Our counters are sealed off to the wall with silicone, so that was impossible. It was just gone. For years, my parents couldn't find that sign. My mom was occasionally joke, the ghost took it. I think the house might be haunted. It became one of those funny but baffling family stories that we'd laugh about but never understood. Fast forward to last year, my parents had to replace their dishwasher, so they pulled the old one out, and guess what they found? The steel sign. It was lying behind the dishwasher. Here's the thing, the dishwasher was on the other side of the kitchen. The counters are sealed, and there's no logical way the sign would have moved across the room and ended up there. To this day, we have no idea how it happened. Maybe the ghost didn't like the sign. Who knows? I get that's not the most thrilling ghost story, but sometimes it's the little inexplainable things that stick with you. That is really weird if it's across the kitchen. My first thought, when they said behind the dishwasher, I was like, okay, maybe it like bounced off a couple things and like somehow got behind there. But if he said it's across the kitchen, I don't know how many things it would have to like bounce across to like get across the kitchen. That seems a little illogical. Our next story is by the user Old Distance 9254, titled Unexplainable Scream During My Night Shift. So this happened about 7 years ago, but I still think about it every so often. Back then, I worked as a security guard, the type of security guard that travels around the city to do these routine checks on objects, Making sure the doors, windows, gates, etc. are locked properly, that no people are on the property, check for fire hazards, attend SOS/robbery alarms, and so on. There is this mall in the city, and per our contract, we did 2 security walks in the mall. The first one when the mall closed, where we basically emptied the mall for customers, locked doors/entrances, checking all the alarm systems. We did the first round by making sure that the mall is empty of both customers and employees, check surveillance, and turning on all the alarms. The second walkthrough usually took place many hours after, in the middle of the night, where we made sure all the entrances are indeed locked, but also took another sweep inside to check for people and so on. This particular evening, the first security walkthrough went by without any issues, just the usual few customers taking forever to get out. The second walkthrough, however, something really weird happened. I started off by walking around the mall, making sure nothing is out of the ordinary and that everything is locked. I step inside and check the alarm monitoring, where everything is turned on, no error codes or logs of people being inside, and after I left the mall, my first time for the shift. I go to the top floor and work myself down each floor. Everything is looking good. Eventually, I end up in the cellar floor, which consists of the toy store on one side, and opposite to the toy store is this huge playroom. Both the playroom and the toy store have see-through glass walls separating them from the hallway in the middle. Anyways, I go down there and did my usual walkthrough of the cellar. The toy store had the sticker on the door saying something about collectibles 50% off or something. I walk up to the glass door and shine my flashlight towards the collectibles section. As I'm focusing on the collectibles, I hear this sudden loud scream behind me, and I mean really loud. Like I wanted to cover my ears. The scream sounded like a little girl, and it screamed, "Mommy," but with a sort of rasp and desperate tone to it, like a death scream, if that's a way to describe it. I quickly turn around, freeze in place while shining my flashlight into the hallway and into the playroom. I just stand there for a solid 10 to 15 seconds trying to see who screamed. After collecting myself, I immediately think that somehow a little girl must have been left in the playroom when the mall closed. So I run into the playroom and start looking through all the toys and plushies, but no girl was found. I then double-check every little surface in the cellar, but no one was there. I began to think my colleagues, who ended his shift many hours ago, was playing a prank on me. So I go back upstairs to the alarm/surveillance monitoring, but again, there's no logs of anyone but me entering different zones using the key card. I then check the surveillance and hear no one but me on all the security cameras. I also started to chuckle at myself as I thought I looked like a coward when it happened. I settled my mind to it being some sort of doll in the toy store with a broken voice box or something, but weird that the scream came from behind me in the hall/playroom. I leave. I visit the store the next day and ask about a doll that screams, but they don't have any dolls with any kind of voice box. They also tidy up and clean the playroom every morning, and if they find toys left behind that they themselves do not own, they make a list and put it in a storage box. No dolls whatsoever. I also asked if they have baby monitors for sale, but they did not. I'm very skeptical by nature and absolutely do not believe in ghosts and will always find a natural/logical, non-supernatural explanation when stuff like that happens. But what happened during that night shift, I just can't explain. Sorry for the long read, but I'm very interested in what y'all think it could have been/have any reasonable explanation for what happened. That's really weird. I mean, sometimes I think I hear something, but then I realize it was just me. And I'm able to repeat the sound. But that wouldn't explain anything if he checked the security camera and heard nothing. Because if you made a noise, it would obviously be picked up. So I don't know, maybe he hallucinated a noise, but that's really random to just hallucinate one noise. I don't know. I could never wander around an abandoned building, even if it's not actually abandoned. I can never walk around an empty building. I would for sure be seeing things and think that there's someone behind me every moment. Our next story is by the user Kenosha Cornified, titled After Dark Trip to the Cemetery. This happened about an hour ago. My friend called me and asked if I could give him a jump because his work car wasn't starting. He works for a security company and has to make rounds at different properties and has had issues with vandals. I agreed to help him since he said it would take at least a couple hours for someone he works with to be able to come get him. He shared his location and I started driving. Didn't realize where he was until I turned onto the driveway. It's a cemetery, and of course, he was on the complete other side of the property. I kept my eyes forward as I drove up the road to where he was. He was waving his flashlight around so I could see him. I pulled up right next to him and asked what happened. He told me it just died without any warning as he was turning around in the gravel parking lot. Important info for what happened shortly after. I had him pop the hood as I grabbed my jumper cables from the trunk and some pliers. I opened his hood to see a battery cable had just come loose. I put it back on and tightened as best as I could with the pliers. His lights come on when I connected the cable to the battery. That's when we realized we weren't alone. We saw a little kid no older than 4 was standing maybe 10 feet away from us. My friend said hi and asked if they needed any help. My friend and I looked at each other for maybe a second and looked back. The little kid was completely gone. There's no way this kid could have ran away without us hearing. He said he will see things look at him from behind the trees or gravestones, but this is the first time ever he saw something just standing there. I told him to stop at my house at some point tonight so I can completely tighten the battery cables. I will ask him if anything else happened after I left when he gets there. Update. My friend just stopped and told me he had something else happen about 5 minutes after I left. He forgot his flashlight where I fixed the car and he was about to turn out of the driveway onto the road. He drove back and didn't see his flashlight in the little parking lot he was looking for, and then noticed a light shining from halfway up a hill. He pulled his car closer to the light and he could see it was his flashlight sitting on a gravestone. He was already on edge from one we had seen about 15 minutes earlier, but he got up to go grab the flashlight. As he reached for it, he heard a little kid's voice from somewhere. He didn't understand any of the words except leave. And that's what he did. He would have come straight here if he didn't have to stop at another property on the way. And just to be clear, the little parking lot is about a quarter mile from where he found it. That's scary. That's really scary. Being in a cemetery in the middle of the night and your car stops working. Our next story is by the user Foxy Girl Plays and is titled My Hospital Stay. On September 3rd, I was spending the night at the hospital for epilepsy. I just didn't know the hospital was completely haunted. Since it was just me and my boyfriend, we had no idea what was going on. I just know that the next morning my boyfriend told me that the lights were flickering and he felt cold spots. The next morning we asked my nurse if anything was going on and she told us that we were staying in a haunted room. She told us that the hospital I was staying in used to be a hospital for the insane and the room I was staying in had a really bad guy in it. She wanted to know if we wanted to change rooms, but at first we thought she was just telling lies, but things got worse. I kept on waking up in the middle of the night and seeing this black smoke. The lights kept turning on and off. My boyfriend and I kept feeling the same thing. On the 4th night, we decided to change rooms. I'm staying at a hospital again in a week. I hope I don't stay at the same hospital. I will say, I think it's kind of weird that a nurse would just say all that. But if they're really having those experiences, I mean, how else can you explain it, I guess? Our next story is by the user SomeIndustry6279, and it's titled Nice Old Lady Reminiscing on Graduation in 1904 in 2019. I have many ghost stories to tell because dead family members and others have visited me and my family for years. Most of my ghost stories happen in my own house, making it a bit harder for people to believe me. But this story happened in broad daylight at a bus stop and with witnesses who saw the same thing I did. It was early June 2019 and graduation day for the 3rd year at my high school. Because it was graduation day, all students got to go home at around lunchtime after saying goodbye to their classmates. I was the 2nd year and had no interest in watching other people graduate. Instead, I decided to take the bus home directly after we were let go. I was one of the only 2 people who had the idea at the time. The rest were probably still in the school and making plans with friends or something. I and this other guy, who I believed was the 1st year, arrived at the high school's bus stop at almost the same time, and already sitting there was an old lady with a cane. She looked to be around 80 to 90 years old and immediately started talking with me. She asked if it was graduation day since so many people were surrounding the entrance to the school building, and I told her it was. She started talking about how she had been one of the first to graduate from this high school and that she had studied to become a doctor or a nurse. This conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes, and I periodically looked in the other boy's direction to check if the bus was on its way. While doing so, I could see him listening in on our conversation, even if he never entered the conversation. Suddenly, I could see the bus coming over the hill and turned to watch as it approached. I looked away for maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and as the bus came to a stop, I turned around to ask if the old lady needed help getting on the bus since she had a cane, but when I turned, she disappeared. I looked both up the hill and down the hill, but there was no way she had been able to walk that distance by herself in that short of time. The walk up the hill usually takes me 10 minutes, and down the hill takes 5 minutes. I came to a stop and turned to the other guy standing there to see if he reacted differently, since I was used to spirits contacting me in different ways. The guy just looked at me, and I could see in his eyes that he had also seen the lady and had no idea what had happened. It almost looked like he had gotten whiplash and decided to freeze while in fight or flight mode. After I confirmed that he had indeed seen the woman, I just calmly walked to the bus and went home. Later, I realized that if she was one of the first classes to graduate from my high school, she needed to have been at least 130 years old. On the day that I met her at the bus stop. I wonder if she just goes there and checks up on all the classes graduating after that. She's like a proud alumni. Our next story is by the user Live Painting 3221. Titled, These Are Some of My True Paranormal Activity Stories. The first experiences I can remember were inside my great-grandparents' house. After my great-grandfather passed away, I would stay with my great-grandmother often. She lived completely alone. We would hear knocks on doors and walls late at night, footsteps and whispering, pots and pans clanging. I was only 4 or 5 at this point. She assured me that it was just my grandpa and not to be scared. She would even sometimes talk to him in a jestful manner. I didn't fully understand because I was so young. She passed away a year or so later. We moved to the house after that. I was around 8 years old and in the 3rd grade. The house was built in the 1930s and was only 2 bedrooms originally. I had 1 room to myself. My little brother and sister, who were twins, had the other room. They were barely a year old, still in their cribs. My mom and her 3rd husband slept on the hideaway bed that folded out from the couch. My bedroom faced the living room where they slept. My door faced out where the couch was, so I could see them sleeping while laying in my bed at night. I had a large chifforobe closet in my room and metal framed bed. The first week we moved in, I began to experience things. I would be awoken by noise to see a shadow moving around in the living room. I would get scared and cover my head up and try to go back to sleep. I would hear something in the chifforobe closet regularly. One night I was awoken by bright lights. Lights so bright, my first thought was that someone parked a car in front of my window, but that's impossible. One night I saw a figure, best described as the opposite of a shadow person, like it was bathed in light, standing over my mother. Some nights I would hear her scratching or tapping the window. One night my metal bed frame started shaking ever so slowly, then a little bit faster and more erratically, like some faint type of force was just shaking it randomly. Shortly after that, I had my first experience with sleep paralysis. I told my mother about it the next day, and she admitted to having the same experience. She described it as a shadow man with a hood over his head, holding her down and sucking the energy out of her. We even made up a name for him, Hoodie. This was in 1997, and we don't have any internet, so we had no idea that this kind of thing was common. I have lots more stories, especially after I became a teenager and moved into a different room in the house. It's really interesting. I was kind of inclined to think it was a grandparents until they said it was holding her down and sucking her energy. I really don't think loved ones would do that. But I wonder if maybe part of the activity was the grandparents, the being bathed in light kind of thing was one of them. And maybe there was just, unfortunately, something else negative that hung out there too. Our next story is by the user Angelic Realm 888, titled The Lady of Fyarns. Yeah, Fyarns. A few years ago, my wife and I went on a trip to Europe with another couple. One of the towns we stayed at for a couple days was Fyarns, Florence. The fair city of Florence is a subject for multiple books with its art, architecture, beauty, and history, so I will not get into that here. If you are fortunate enough to have been there, you will know what I'm talking about. You'd also know that you cannot take a step in the city without being a stone's throw away from something historic, and all that history is bound to have itself a fair share of paranormal history attached. On our first night in the historic part of town, we stayed at one of the few modern hotels. This place had been completely built as a new structure, so there was nothing historic about it, but it did have a striking view of Duomo. We could only stay there one night due to room availability, but the staff was kind enough to book us a room in a hotel that was a few streets away. We walked over to the place, and it was this charming chateau-looking building. I don't know what else to call its design, and it looked very old. We could not check in yet, but we asked the front desk to store our luggage so we could go sightseeing. While my friend was taking care of that, I walked around the lobby, which had an interesting display of art, items, and pictures from the hotel's history. A quick browse of the display, and I quickly found out that the hotel had a rich history indeed. It had been the residence of a very wealthy family, then had been a convent, a hospital, and an insane asylum, a hospital again, and now a hotel. I have seen enough horror films to know that this is the premise where you know bad stuff is going to happen and you tell the characters to turn around and leave. However, I shrugged it off and decided not to tell my wife, who freaks out about things like that. We had a wonderful day and evening. We retired to our room, which was nice, and promptly fell asleep. I woke up around dawn. Since I am a light sleeper and an early riser, and could tell it was dawn because the sunlight was trickling in from the edges of the window curtains. The room's window was at the very center of the wall, and from its left edge there were around 5 feet of wall until the wall met the corner where the floor-to-ceiling dresser stood. My wife normally sleeps later than I do, so when I wake up, I normally stay in bed for a while, thinking about the upcoming day and anything and everything. And that's when I saw her. At the corner of the wall between the window and the dresser, about a foot off the ground, there was a lady, dressed in all white, floating in the air. She was not translucent, but was not completely solid either. It was hard to describe her appearance. However, I could see her facial features. I could tell she had light hair and very fair skin. Her expression was truly kind and calming, with a warm, tender smile. There was no exchange of words, no movement or gestures, no telepathic messages. We just remained there for a while, staring at each other. It's important to mention that at no point I felt threatened or scared. Freaked out, though? Definitely. My wife began stirring in bed next to me and eventually put her arm across my chest and began making light, half-asleep conversation. I did not break eye contact with the entity at all and began smiling back at her. Just one of those comfortable, sincere smiles. As my wife became more active, I said to her, "Don't look, but there's a woman in our room. She's floating. I think she's a ghost." My wife opened her eyes wide, all the mind fogginess running from her head. She stared at me for a few seconds, and then out of the corner of my eye, I could tell that she had shut her eyes in an "I don't want to look" way. A few moments after that, the lady moved backwards and faded into the wall. She did not say goodbye or change her expression. She just left. I told my wife she could look now, but she did not want to. I could tell she was praying. We went down for breakfast, and I told our friends the story, which they, of course, did not believe. I went to the front desk and told the person there what I had seen. She asked me if I wanted to fill out a form about what I had seen. Apparently it was not uncommon, but the experiences and the guests' reactions were very wide-ranging, and they had figured over the years that most guests just wanted someone to listen to them. So they instituted the form so people would not talk about the encounters around other guests and just write them down. I chose not to write anything. To this day, I clearly remember the fondness of the smile of the Lady of Fyrens. I would like to thank her for reaching out to me and being so kind. I like that. That's like a nice story. A very chill ghost experience. Our next story is by the user Anatastic6417, titled "A Series of Ghost Stories from My Old Job." Hello everybody. I was told a number of stories from people in my last job and never really found anywhere to tell them until I found the sub. I'm a teacher in Ireland and my old school has so many ghost stories, each of them centering around a particular room. I hope you enjoy. Most of the stories come from the caretaker, Alan, as he is most often in the school late. These stories are in no particular order and told by him. In the past, in my old school, students used to participate in a school sleepover to raise money for homeless charities. However, one year there was an incident and the event never repeated again. The students who were sleeping in room 10 ran out of the room screaming during the night and had their parents collect them early. Nobody knows what happened, but after this, the event was never repeated. The next story comes from an SNA, special needs assistant, called Sarah. Sarah was helping clean up the school at the end of the day. She was in room 10, sweeping up when she swears she saw a face of a nun in the reflection in the mirror. She told a few people, but convinced herself it was her mind playing tricks. A few weeks later, the students opened a time capsule that was buried and contained pictures of the school when it was opened. One of those pictures was a nun Sarah claimed to see, and she fainted upon seeing the picture. The story was told to me by Alan, and I asked Sarah about it, and she backed it up. The next story comes from Alan himself. Alan was in the building late at night because the burglar alarm went off. He walked around the building and noticed one of the emergency exits was wide open. After closing it, he went around the building to check everything was in order. As the clock struck 12, the door to the lift opened up. Alan ran from the building without resetting the alarm. There is yet another story from Alan. Room 10 was an upstairs room and Alan was downstairs alone cleaning up. He heard chairs being moved in room 10 as if class had just ended. He went upstairs to see who was there, but all the chairs in room 10 were up on the table where they were supposed to be. Eventually, management decided the staff room should be expanded, and they did this by knocking down the wall between the staff room and room 10. Room 10 was no longer a classroom, but strange things continued to happen in the corner of the staff room that was formerly room 10. The next story is from a teacher called Kara and an SNA called Rose. Kara always came into work very early and was usually the first person in the building. As she was walking in, she could see a light in the staff room and a figure by the printers. The printers are located where room 10 used to be. She was confused as there was no other cars, but nonetheless, Kara went inside anyway. Kara got into the staff room and the lights in the staff room were off. She didn't bother whoever was by the printer and sat down, but could still hear paper rustling. Eventually, the SNA, Rose, came in and Kara asked her who was by the printers. Rose said there was nobody there. The next story comes from another teacher called Emma. Emma came into work early one day, and just like Kara, she entered the staff room and turned the lights on. Emma saw a figure down beside the printers, room 10, doing work. She said hello, and that was all. She turned to make a cup of tea, and when she turned around again, the figure was gone. Those are all stories I was told. Alan told me all of them one day, and it was backed up by everybody else. I never made any observations myself, but there was one moment where I had a feeling something was wrong. There was a school musical and I was working with it. I went for a little coffee break in the staff room around 9 p.m. The lights were off and I put them on, but the printing area was pitch black. I stood and stared into the blackness, feeling like there was definitely something there looking back, but nothing happened and I went back to work. Hope you enjoy my stories.
It's really interesting.
I love haunted school stories, so that one was really enjoyable to read. There were like so many different little pieces of activity here. Our next story is by the user Angelic Realm 888 called Visiting the Grandkids. I never met my father-in-law. He passed away 5 years before I met my wife. If he were alive today, he would have 9 grandchildren, including my kids. However, he only got to meet 2 of them in his lifetime. There's a framed picture that my wife keeps on her nightstand next to her side of the bed of him dancing with her when she was 15 or 16. They are both looking at the camera, his head tilted back a little with larger-than-life smile. It's one of those pictures that brings a smile to your face, even if you do not know the person in it. There is a copy of that picture and many similar ones at my mother-in-law's house. They all have the same theme, him and his contagious smile. By all accounts, he was always the life of the party, would get people to dance, and be cheerful. He was also a devoted family man and was thankful that he got to enjoy time with his 2 granddaughters while battling a disease that eventually took him away. Fast forward 18 years, all the grandkids are home, including the 2 oldest ones, who now live away and attend college. We had a potluck at my mother-in-law's home, and my kids were just thrilled to see their older cousins. Although the age gap between the oldest kid and the youngest is 15 years, they all get along well, and the oldest ones are just sweethearts about playing and entertaining their younger relatives. At my eldest child's insistence, we invited all 9 kids for a sleepover at our house. We ordered pizza and set up a bunch of air mattresses and video games for the kids to enjoy in my daughter's bedroom. Of course, no adults were allowed. Just some background information. My house was built in 2014 on empty land and it was rented out to a couple of families before us, so there was no weird history there. The layout of the house has 3 bedrooms upstairs. As soon as you come up from the stairs, there is a master bedroom to the right and the other 2 bedrooms to the left. If the master bedroom door is open, you get a clear view of our bed as soon as you hit the upstairs landing. Likewise, if you were in my bed, you could see whoever is coming up the stairs. That evening, after all the kids shut themselves up in their pajama party, my wife was doing chores while I was watching TV from my bed. I normally close my door when I watch TV, as I am very conscious about my kids not being exposed to content inappropriate for their age. However, as my wife kept coming in and out of the bedroom, she just left the door open at some point. I'm not sure about the exact time. It must have been 9 or 10 p.m. when I noticed someone coming up the stairs. It was not a shadow, it was not a see-through figure, it was a person, with the sound of the steps and everything. As soon as the person got to the landing, I could fully see him and realized it was my father-in-law, my deceased father-in-law. He was not scary or disfigured like a zombie on TV. He looked exactly like the guy in the picture, and he had that smile, that disarming smile. Surprised, I've had my fair share of paranormal encounters. I just stared at him for a while and then decided to greet him aloud. "Hello, mister. How are you?" Stupid question. He could have come back with a burn and replied, "Dead." He had that kind of humor from what I had been told. "I'm fine, thank you. I am here to visit the kids," he replied, in what I assume was his voice since I had never met him or seen videos of him. "Okay," I said. He just nodded and moved over towards the kids' bedroom. I did not hear anyone screaming in the bedroom, so I figured I was the only one who saw him. I paused the show and debated whether to tell my wife about what had just transpired. She gets really freaked out when these things happen to me, and she is still overly sensitive about her father. However, her supernatural ability is to see right through me, so she could tell something was up. I decided to tell her straight up what happened. She followed with an avalanche of questions, but she was quite calm about it. I told her what he looked like, what he was wearing, and his demeanor. I also told her that we had both spoken aloud as far as I knew, and that I heard his voice. It had not been some sort of mental conversation. His lips even moved and everything. Tears began rolling, and as I comforted her, she began to cry about her frustration of not being the one who had seen him, since she was his daughter after all. I had no reply for that, other than to share a genuine feeling that I got from him, that he loved them and watched over them. My wife calmed down after a few minutes and then went to bed. She asked me not to say anything to the kids or the in-laws. I was ahead of her in that sentiment. We ended up telling them later, and they all share stories about how they at some point or another felt his presence, but nothing with the certainty that I was relating. I was glad to have met him, and I believe that we would have gotten along very well. I caught a glimpse of the feeling that everyone who knew him shares about him. He was a kind, warm, fun-loving person. I hope my children, his grandchildren, share those traits and values. That's really nice. I feel like maybe he didn't show himself to her because he wasn't sure if she'd be ready. Like, it might, maybe open up a can of worms for her if she's still, like, really sensitive about it. But also, maybe it was nice because he'd never met, his father-in-law before. So it was his way of meeting him at some point. And I don't know, it was kind of perfect. He was going to visit all of his grandkids and just stop by to meet his son-in-law, I guess. That's a really sweet story. Our next story is by the user Halfling Tefling, titled 2005 Haunted Apartment in Chicago. My husband and I got a crappy apartment in 2005. We had a handshake deal to work out the place in exchange for reduced rent, but were absolute fools and didn't get it in writing, which means we were paying full price for a place that had literal holes in the walls. We had to keep the couch in one specific place against an exterior wall, otherwise there was a brisk draft. Jeez. And windows were nailed shut because the latches were broken. There was one bedroom, a very small room we used as an office, and a huge pantry. There was a window that had been sided over. The entire window situation of the place was messed up and weird. The bedroom had a huge dent in the plaster and wall look, I went to Catholic school. The school was in a former convent, and the blackboards were plaster and left walls painted with chalkboard paint with trim around them. The 7th grade teacher flipped out at one point and grabbed a kid's head and smacked it into the wall. This was super weird as it was not a school that did any kind of corporal punishment, but it was the 90s. The bedroom had that dent exactly like that. Okay, that's weird. I refused to go into the basement, and I didn't really like sleeping in the bedroom. I have horrible insomnia and spend a lot of time unable to get to sleep or unable to get back to sleep. And it was really rough when I look over and see a little kid, about 4 to 6 years old, staring at me quietly, just standing there and staring. Light skin, thick straight black hair, eyes completely shadowed, but I could still tell he was looking at me. It felt like he wanted something, but I could never figure out what. The previous tenant had left some stuff behind, asked if we could hold on to it for him. He came back after we'd been there a few months. I asked why he'd moved out, and he said he was tired of having family come to visit Chicago and insist on staying with him. So he moved into a large studio close to where he worked, and the best part is, it's not haunted. Okay, buddy, hold up. So we talked a little bit, and he described the same thing, waking up at night to see a little kid staring at him. He hated the basement, too. There were a few other things that happened. Once I was utterly overcome with a huge feeling of dread. I have an anxiety disorder, so I'm used to suddenly freaking out for no reason, but it wasn't like this at all. It's like something had a hold of me inside. I'd experienced lower levels of the feeling in that place before. A sick feeling that I'd never experienced previously and haven't experienced since. My husband was visiting family, and I called him and made him come home, which is very out of character for me. I'm really used to being alone and also hate interrupting his family time. But he came home, and the next day, busted out some of his tools. He'd noticed some of the outlets weren't grounded and fixed them. That feeling completely stopped, and I never felt it again. So did that contribute to things? And why did I and the previous tenant have the same experiences? I also saw inexplicable dark shadows there, ones that flew through the air as opposed to being on a wall or the ceiling. I thought a bat had gotten in or something. It swooped behind a heavy piece of furniture, and I went and moved the furniture around looking for it, but there was nothing. I'm bipolar and have auditory hallucinations sometimes, so it's possible that was a visual hallucination. I really don't know. I've seen weird shadowy stuff at other places, but never that often or that solid seeming. Is it a brain thing, or is it really there? I really dislike not knowing. That whole story is a little bit weird. I feel like maybe with the whole thing about grounding and the outlets, maybe like there was an excess of energy and the spirits were like pulling from that to be like weirder or like cause more activity. That's a possibility, but that's an interesting story. Our next story is by the user Nate the Great 1217, and it's titled My Paranormal Stories from Birth Until Present. Story 1, 2013. I was 15 years old. This was my first ever experience. My grandma on my mom's side passed away. Me and my brother and my mom would visit my grandpa over the next couple years, a lot more since he was lonelier. This probably happened 2 to 3 times. We would all be sitting in the living room, then we would hear soft sounds of plates and cutlery moving around the kitchen. We would all kind of look at each other knowing it was out of the ordinary, but I think we all knew it was her. Story 2, 2015. I was 17 at the time. Me and my friends decided to head out of my big city to explore an abandoned building in a small town. Erected in the late 1800s, it used to be a hospital, senior home, and mental asylum at all points in time. It was me, my girlfriend, her cousin, and my friend. Within minutes of walking around inside, we all stop in our tracks as we hear a loud, deep moan. There was no wind at the time, and it was clearly heard right in front of us. We all left immediately out of fear. Story 3, 2016. I'm 18 now. I was camping with my girlfriend, same one, my brother, and our friend. I had a very emotional dream of some being coming to me and explaining that something bad happened, but that everything was going to be okay. The next morning we pack up after an hour or two. I don't think anything of the dream. Just as we were getting out of the mountains into the foothills/prairies, a cop pulls us over with an unmarked car behind him and asks me and my brother our names and pulls us aside to explain our mom passed away last night. Since I was the only one with a license, it was the longest 2-hour drive of my life, that's for sure. Sorry, is that normal for like a cop to find you out in the middle of nowhere? It's so weird. Unless someone like sent them out there, but that's crazy. Okay. Story 4, 2017. 19 years old. Me and my girlfriend, still the same one, headed out for a camping trip to the mountains. We were only 20 minutes outside of town in the prairies. I saw a semi coming from a mile away, and I get this urgent feeling that something was wrong and something was going to happen. Since he was still far away, I had lots of time to explain to my girlfriend about the sudden sense that came over to me. When we were 5 to 10 seconds from crossing paths, I noticed he starts to drift into my lane, single-lane highway. By the time we passed each other, he was directly in the middle of both lanes. Luckily for me, I was already prepared and was way over onto the shoulder. She looked at me in utter disbelief. Story 5, 2019, 21 years old. I'm home alone, and at this point, I'm a full believer. I had not yet received any signs from my mom. I'm laying in my bed trying to talk with her, hoping maybe she can hear me. I asked her to knock on the wall for me. It was a more rough point in my life, so for whatever reason, I was in tears at the time. I gave up and tried to go to sleep. 30 seconds later, I hear a loud knuckle-to-wall sound in my room, clear as day. That was my sign, and I felt a lot more comfortable after that. Story 6, 2024. I'm now 25 years old. My grandpa just passed on 3 weeks earlier. My dad's over at my place visiting. We're watching some hockey when all of a sudden, someone starts to whistle. Within seconds, we're both whistling random nonsense tunes, but then we hear a third whistle when no one else was in the house. My fiance, different girl now, was out running a couple errands. We started to whistle back, and something kept whistling back loud at us, mimicking our whistles perfectly. This went on for a good 2 to 3 minutes. It was whistling just as loud as us, but in different areas of our house. My grandpa was known to be a whistler, but I never got a good nor bad sense about it. I'll leave this up to you guys to decide if it was my grandpa or something more malevolent. My dad was a complete non-believer at the time, but this really opened up his eyes. It was his first real paranormal experience. It's really interesting. I feel like it seems like he's very in tune with all this stuff. Our next story is by the user Purple Rain Dreams 23, titled, My parents are from a small country in South America. Not sure about now, but back in the 70s/80s when my parents lived there, paranormal was very normal. So many weird little stories, superstitions, and legends from my parents. But they say that they don't believe in ghosts now. Not sure if they just don't want to give substance to the things that they have experienced, but I want to fill you in on one that included me. About 12 years ago, I was 21 at the time. I think I was about to go into my senior year of college. It was the summer. My brother and I stayed home, and my mom and dad went to South America for the first time in about 17 years to see family. It was an early Saturday morning, and my parents, along with my mother's cousins and my mother's brother, decided to visit my mother's parents' grave sites. It's a very rural area, third world almost. No one really took care of the cemetery anymore, and they knew it was going to be a scorcher of a day, so they went super early with umbrellas for shade. Chalk, because it was a thing to decorate the tombstones, and a giant machete to chop away all the overgrown weeds and grass. They arrive. It's a cemetery, no trees, overgrown, and the sun is already blazing. There's one cloud. It follows my parents to my grandparents' tombs. If I remember correctly, they were above ground. My mom's cousin goes to chop the brush/weed around my grandparents' tombs with a machete, and it flies out of his hands. Not a small man. Uses his hands a lot. Strong guy. He's like, okay, maybe it's the wrong angle. He goes to grab it. It's stuck in the ground, straight up. He tries again, same thing. But this time, it flies in the opposite direction that physics says it should. Landed in the ground, straight up. My dad tries. Same thing. Finally, my dad says, okay, I think they want their son to do this because, remember, my uncle is there. He picks it up and chops it all away. They go about doing their tasks, and when they are all done, the one cloud above them dissipates. The kicker? They call me when they come back from the cemetery from South America, and it's about 11 a.m. on the East Coast. Not too much of a time difference from where they are. Their call wakes me from a dream where I was dreaming about a cemetery and people in it. The image of the dream still sticks out in my mind. Weird, right? That is interesting. That's so weird that it's like some invisible force is making the machete go flying. I don't know, that's really random. Our next story is by the user Evil Millionaire, titled, I think my workplace is haunted. Do I believe in ghosts? Not really. I'm a pretty hard atheist, but this is pretty difficult to be logically explained. I started a job in a hotel as a bartender about 5 months ago. This hotel is one of the first buildings in the suburb. I'm talking over 100 years old. Almost every shift, I see shadows moving out of the corner of my eyes, specifically in the same areas, but no one is there. I sense a customer might be walking past me, but I'll look around and nobody is there. I hear my name being called so clearly, multiple times throughout the shift, but nobody is there. The weird thing is, my mother used to work here in room service many years ago and told me it was haunted and that she saw a ghost. Like I said, this place is over 100 years old. There has been many hundreds of thousands of people here and their energy here. I work as a bartender at another place as well, more modern. I do not see shadows or hear my name being called. Anywhere else. So I don't think it's a psychological problem or a phenomenon. I don't believe these spirits have negative intentions. They've never intimidated me or made me feel uncomfortable or interfere with my work. But these strange occurrences happen every shift. I'm convinced my workplace is haunted. Maybe. I mean, like he said, with all the different energies that have been going in and out of the building for however many years, like at least a century, then I wouldn't be surprised if there's just like some residual energy. Especially if he doesn't feel like it's really interfering with him, it probably is just a lot of residual energy of people wandering around the bar and stuff like that. Probably nothing to be concerned about, but that's really interesting. Our next story is by the user Maleficent Week 2468, titled Something in the Shadows. When I was 17, I joined the Army. I was sent to southern Georgia for basic training in infantry school. At the time that I was in, the base that I was on was entirely combat arms training. Infantry school, airborne school, ranger school, etc. It's important you know this because I enlisted during a time when the Army was still practicing archaic conservative restrictions such as don't ask, don't tell, not allowing transgender persons in at all, and not allowing women in combat arms. All stupid and useless restrictions, but my disagreements with the Army are a topic for another time. The point is this base was isolated at a facility more or less exclusively occupied by male soldiers. Near the end of infantry school, I fractured both of my shins and was given 3 choices: medical discharge, stay in but move to more of a desk-type job, or go to physical therapy and rehabilitation program, PTRP, to heal and try again. I chose the latter. PTRP was on a different part of the base. It was a little removed, and the drill sergeants were more focused on our healing and rehabilitation than our training and hardening. Consistent throughout my time in the Army was a duty called Fire Watch. Fire Watch is a guard shift that, despite its name, has less to do with the prevention and response of fires breaking out in the barracks and more to do with preventing guys from running away, assaulting each other, or trying to commit suicide. Charming, right? So as it would go, you and your bunkmate, commonly referred to as your battle buddy or simply battle, would be assigned an hour or 2 of watch at some point throughout the night, and the assignments moved down the bunk roster. There are always 2 of us, one guarding the door and one silently roving and making sure nothing and no one was out of place. One night, my battle buddy and I pulled watch between 2 and 3 in the morning. It started out as any other watch. Battle took a spot on the door while I roved. Now, there was this corner of the barracks opposed from the door, past the 4 rows of bunks, and it was notoriously creepy. In daylight, the other soldiers would whisper about it, but all anyone could really muster was that it was exceptionally dark and unsettling. Most guys use a flashlight while roving on fire watch, but that always woke me up and I hated it. So while I roved, I left my flashlight off, allowing my eyes to adjust to the dark and hopefully not interrupting the sleep of my fellow soldiers. As I made my way through the rows of bunks, I turned the corner on the last row, the row farthest from the door. That corner was exceptionally dark, the kind of thick darkness that goes beyond being devoid of light. It had an unnatural density. This was more than emptiness. This was the kind of darkness that contained something within it, something from beyond the veil, a kind of beckoning. That was the first impression I had as I made my way down the rows, closer to the corner. Something was building inside me. Every step closer to that corner, I felt more dread seeping up into my body, like how rain will crawl up your pants legs from the foot, cold and invasive. I was only about 5 bunks down out of about 30 or 40. Every slow, silent step forward was spent not observing the bunks, but locked on that corner. I became absolutely certain of 2 things. First was that there was something in that corner that I couldn't see, but that I couldn't look away from. And second, its gaze was fixed on mine as well, and made me feel hollow. This realization caused the hair all over my body to stand on end, and terror washed over me, pulling me in like gravity. I felt as if every atom of my body was screaming to get away, screaming against its pull while my feet stepped closer as if no longer under my control. The sensation filling me up inside was hard to explain. Do you ever get a feeling deep in your bones, an understanding beyond thought, a sudden realization that what you were feeling is an absolute truth? The shadow creature just emanated a pulsing feeling and being of sinister wrong. I mean, the most wrong anything has ever felt in my life. I had to get away from it. Finally, my feet were my own again, and I decided at that point it was time to join my battle buddy by the door. After very slowly backing out of the row, never turning away from the corner, I thought I would feel better once I got away. I was wrong. The shadow's awareness seemed to remain fixed on me, following me in the darkness that stretched across the ceiling until I reached my friend. At first, I wasn't sure if I would tell the other guy about this. I mean, what could I say? Its inability to be spoken of was part of the haunted feeling. The shadow had me. I was vulnerable and isolated in darkness. It claimed me. I tried to shake it off and quickly started a conversation with Battle. Just as I was beginning to feel okay, we heard something that couldn't have been there. The small, almost soft, angelic voice of a child called for its daddy from outside the very door we stood guard. Benign as it sounds, it's almost 3 a.m. on a training base. Not only should there not be children here, but certainly not awake and looking for their dad. This was all wrong. My bunkmate and I stared at each other. I asked if he heard that. He says yes, and asked if I heard it. I said yes. We stared at each other in silence for a moment before I say the stupidest thing possible. We have to check. I can see on my friend's face that he absolutely hates me right now, his eyes pleading with me not to. I don't blame him, because as I reach for the door handle, I'm hating this decision too. But if there is somehow a kid out there, we have to try to help. Slowly, I turn the handle. Ready to open the door, I wait, and with our eyes fixed on each other, we count. 1, 2, 3. We quickly open the door and bob our heads in and out as quickly as though they might get shot off. Nothing. An empty field. Quickly and quietly we close the door. We locked eyes again, but before we could say anything next, a sound filled our ears. Child's laughter. No longer angelic, but a mischievous, wicked giggle surrounded us. I watched as my friend's eyes gaped with horror and dread washed over his face. No doubt he saw the same in me. As we stood there with ice in our veins, there was no need to ask each other if we heard it that time. We locked the door. We stood next to each other completely still and in total silence for the remainder of our guard shift, then woke the next two to take over without saying anything about any of it. In fact, we never spoke of it again. I wonder if, wherever he is, it still haunts him too. I cannot explain what we encountered, but what was with us that night, it manipulated our emotions, delighted in frightening us, and made a meal of our fear. Wow. That was really good. Whoever wrote this, really good at writing things. I don't know what to say other than wow. Like, that is frightening. Like, of course there should be no children inside of the barracks. Like, if you hear children there, like, it's a ghost or something pretending to be a child. Our next story is by the user introduction number 1799, titled Visitation Before Birth. Hello everyone, I gave birth in August of last year on 8/8/24. About a week before I went into labor, I went into an intense nesting mode, cleaning everything. After cleaning, I cooked tacos. We sat at the table and ate, then went and watched a movie, The Craft to be exact. After watching the movie, I went back into the kitchen to clean. In the middle of the floor, face down and open, was a copy of The Fault in Our Stars that belonged to my best friend, Carly, that I got from her belongings when she passed away in 2020. The bookshelf was filled to the brim with books, so to pull that one out, you really had to use force. It's hard for me to understand how this happened. My husband swears he didn't touch it, and the only thing I could think of is it was my dear friend Carly saying hello from the other side. Although I was confused, the second I saw it, I got a sense of comfort and happiness. I hugged the book as I picked it up and put it back in its place. This is the only unexplainable experience I've ever had in this house. I feel like if I was Carly and I took that book out so you'd think of me or know I was watching over you, watching you hug the book would make me feel so good. I don't know, that's just such a sweet gesture on both of their ends. Although the title Visitation Before Birth makes it sound like it's a really creepy encounter, and then it ends up being something really sweet like that. Okay, so the next story is by the user Sam Beyond 3R34, titled I Saw Something as My Mom. When I was 11 or 12 years old, I would always wake up in the middle of the night for no reason. Sometimes my blanket is rolled up in a corner in my bed, so I would sit up, untangle it, cover myself with it, and go back to sleep. That night, I sit up and find my blanket, but there was something in the doorway of my room. When I looked at it, it was my mom, hunched over. Then she smiled widely. I don't know what the correct word for it is. She made a tuck, tuck, tuck noise from her mouth by hitting her teeth together in a biting motion. Then she walked away. I got so scared and I covered my head and toes in the blankets. Eventually, I fell asleep. My mother is not the kind of person who does pranks. Never in my life seen her try to prank anyone. The whole incident was long forgotten until recently in the middle of the night I woke up again for no reason. My fan was still on, so I got up, turned it off, and went back to bed. The moment I closed my eyes, I heard the tuck, tuck, tuck sound right in my ear. I checked my whole room and I was the only one in the room. With that, the old memories came back. I told the whole story to a friend and we were talking about it when we heard the same tuck, tuck, tuck noise from a corner. We both heard it and both stopped talking instantly. We again checked the room to find nothing but ourselves. So that's the story. Sorry if there's misspelling or grammar problems. English is my first language. It's a true story, by the way. That's really creepy. It's like a mimic, I guess. Or it started out as a mimic trying to be her mom and then continues making noises. I don't know. I'm for some reason I'm picturing like a scorpion or like those beetles where they have little pinchery things and making that noise. Yeah, that's creepy. Next story is by the user Wibbles4600, titled My Scariest Ghost Experience. I lived in Union, Maine for the first 14 years of my life. A beautiful blue farmhouse with a huge basement, backyard, and blueberry field. I had been hearing some strange sounds coming from my basement, and my mom never wanted me to go down there. I let my mind get the best of me, and I decided to go down there one day. My mom wasn't home, and I was there with my dog. So little me took my dog down with me so I wasn't scared. I walked down the 13 stairs to my basement, and my feet hit the floor, my dog right on my tail. When you walk down the stairs, you can go left or right. If you turn left, there's a little room that was used as a bedroom for my older brother. If you turn right, there was the garage area where we would bring cars in to work on them, along with the wood stove and the boiler room. Stacked along the wall was nothing but wood we used for heat. I remember walking around the area barefoot, and I stepped on a nail. I screamed in pain and wobbled my way up the stairs and tried to pull it out when my mom came home and found me in a pool of blood. We bandaged up my foot, and I was sent outside to play when my mom spent the afternoon sweeping up the basement. A few days later, I wanted to go down again, so I did. Once again, I brought my dog with me. This time I made sure to wear shoes. Made it over to the boiler room, and when I heard a small moan, that's when my dog started to freak out. He was growling, the hair standing on the back of his neck. He was as nervous as I was. I panicked once again and ran back upstairs. I spent the day wanting to figure out what was down there, but I gave up for a while. One night I was lying in bed. You know when you're almost asleep and you get jumped awake? Well, I jumped, and when I did, I kicked my dog in the process, and he fell on the ground, unable to move. Jeez. The only thing I could move was my eyes, and they darted across the room at the corner I was always scared of. There, stood in that corner, was a tall black shadow. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I started to sweat as it walked over to me and stopped right at my bedside. I looked at the little clock, and it said 2:07 a.m. That's when my body awoke. I looked at my clock, and it said 7:02 a.m. I was asleep the whole time. I told my mom about it, but of course no one believed me. I wanted so bad to know what this thing was. A few weeks later, I had just come home from school and my mom wasn't home, so I didn't do my homework as all kids do. I wanted to play. My neighbor was home, so I decided to have him come outside to play with me in the basement. This is when things took a dark turn. He brought a Ouija board. Dear Lord. We played at the table downstairs when a pen spun and hit me in the gut. He laughed and thought I did it on purpose. When we both let go of the board, that's when the light started to flicker, and the board flipped up on its side. He threw it into the wood stove, but it wouldn't catch fire. That's when we knew we needed to get out of there. We started to run up the stairs when I was pushed down them. He didn't stop until he was at the top of the stairs when he finally noticed. Things finally started to calm down and went back to normal. My dreams kept repeating themselves, and I eventually sought out therapy. There's plenty more stories I want to share, so I'll continue posting them. Thank you all for taking the time to read this, and bless you all. That's why we don't play with Ouija boards. Obviously, there was weird stuff happening before that, but that's why we don't play with Ouija boards. Also, after I reread a paragraph, I think I misunderstood, so in case you guys misunderstood too, when he kicked his dog didn't fall to the ground unable to move. He fell to the ground unable to move. So I guess it's not good that a child fell to the ground unable to move, but it's not like the dog was paralyzed or something after that. Just to clarify. I think the dog's fine. Our final story is by the user Kenosha Cornfed, titled Grandma's Voice. My grandma passed away last September, and a creepy thing happened when my family and I went back home for Thanksgiving. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, my dad asked me to go over to my grandma's house with him to help look for some papers that he needed for the farm. He was digging through the closet in the basement, and I'm upstairs looking through closets up there. All of a sudden, we hear my grandma yelling for help from her bedroom. We both drop what we're doing and run to the main floor of the house. We look at each other and we both nod to signal each other that we both heard my grandma. We both then look at the closed bedroom door and start stepping towards it. As my dad reaches out for the doorknob, we hear my grandma again, but much quieter, almost a whisper from the room. We look at each other again, gave a look, and we sprinted out of the house. As we turn around in the driveway, I swear I could see my grandma just sitting at the kitchen table, staring at us. I don't know, like, if I heard my grandma, I wouldn't be scared. I wouldn't be scared and run out of the house. Like, dude, I'd be like searching every corner of the house, being like, where are you? Like, let's hang, you know? I mean, I guess she was like yelling for help, but like maybe she wanted them to come hang out quickly. She wanted them to get there as fast as possible. I wouldn't be freaked out if I heard any of my grandparents' voices. I would be thrilled to hopefully have a conversation with them again. So I feel like there's no reason to be scared in that instance. But yeah, that is it for this video. I feel like this one ended up being pretty long. I've been filming for at least a couple hours now, so we'll see how long this gets in editing. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what your favorite story was and your thoughts on any of them. If you guys like this video, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up. I will pop a couple video suggestions on screen here for you in a second. Please click the subscribe button down below if you haven't already. Turn on post notifications so you don't miss my next video. I post every Sunday and sometimes Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Please check me out on Instagram and TikTok, linked down below. I post creative special effects makeup looks over there. And add me on Snapchat. I love vlogging my days on my stories. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Bye.